Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spirit of Truth Church for this talk on the rapture and what the rapture has to do with the end times. So this is actually a pretty important lecture in this series, and one of the things we're going to talk about is the different approaches to end times theology. And I'd like to go ahead and start out with this quote. This is, eschatology means the theology of last things. Everyone has some sort of eschatology. There is much divergence in this area of doctrine, and because some things are not crystal clear, some assume that eschatology should be given lesser importance than other areas of biblical truth. Is there any area of doctrine that has not been debated? We must not slight what the Bible says about the future. So, fun little quote from the book. Essentially, understanding the timing of these future events, or these eschatological events, is a major issue with the future fulfillment of prophetic events and the study of eschatology. So there are a couple of different approaches. We're actually going to go through each of them here. So the first one is preterism. Okay, preterism as an approach. So what you have to do, in other words, to really talk about the rapture is you've got to adopt an approach. So here are some of the approaches. First is preterism, and this is from the Latin word praeter, or past. And in this view, most or up to all of the prophecies in Revelation and the New Testament have already been fulfilled, including the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD. So all prophecy, or almost all of it, has been fulfilled in a preterist viewpoint. And there are really two branches. There's partial preterist and full preterist. And so Sproul was a partial preterist, and he argued that many or all of the events were fulfilled in Revelation were fulfilled by or during the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Preterists believe that Jesus came in 70 AD in a cloud, coming to destroy Jerusalem through the Roman army, and that Nero was the beast of Revelation 13. They argue that the kingdom is a present reality, and that in a real historical event, the parousia, or Christ's coming, has already occurred. So David Chilton's a preterist, and he argues that most of Revelation is history. And he also argues that the greatest enemy of the church was the apostate Israel, and it used the power of the pagan Roman Empire to try and stamp out Christianity. He argues that John's message, that the greatest obstacle to the church's victory over the world would soon be judged and destroyed, was a contemporary message, not a future message, or a futuristic message. Gentry and DeMar state that the time of the tribulation is past. It happened in 70 AD, and they reject a 7-year time at the end. But partial preterists do believe in a full, final return of Jesus at the end of the age. So they're still in the realm of orthodoxy because they don't deny a second coming in the future. Now, full preterism, though, is that all biblical prophecies, including the second coming and the final resurrection, have already been fulfilled, and that we are in the new heavens and the new earth of Revelation 21 through 22. And I would argue that their denial of a final literal resurrection of the dead and a final judgment puts them outside of orthodoxy. Now, what are the weaknesses of this view? Well, it's unable to maintain a consistent interpretive method with regard to Bible prophecy. So they apply literal method to passages they can fit into historical events that occurred in 70 AD, but otherwise they spiritualize or allegorize the text. They also limit the use of global language of prophecy to refer to the Jewish people and land of Israel only, when there's a lot of more global things that go on. And also the date of Revelation is a very serious problem. They argued it was written in 65 AD, but there's overwhelming evidence that it was actually written in AD 95. The second view we'll talk about is historicism, and this was purported by Joachim of Fiore in the 12th century. And he argued that the book of Revelation outlines a prophetic panorama of major events of church history from the first century all the way up into the return of Jesus. And this was popular during the Protestant Reformation. People would argue things like the Antichrist was the Pope and Babylon is Roman Catholicism. And it really takes a newspaper approach to eschatology. The major weaknesses are that there's a complete lack of agreement about the various outlines of church history. There's a lot of conjecture and speculation, and it's not really widely held. Idealism is a much more popular view. And this is the spiritual, symbolic, or allegorical view. It's the timeless symbolic approach. And quote, it interprets Revelation as a series of repeated symbolic pictures of the church's struggle from John's day until the second coming, the last judgment, and the eternal state. And so they depict Revelation as the battle between the church and the world at all times in church history. And so there's no concrete meaning given to the numerous symbols in the book. And it really uses an allegorical method of interpretation, which was developed under Philo, Origen, and Clement as well. It then passed through Augustine and Jerome, and it is a growing view. I would argue it's probably one of the most dominant views in Christianity, especially American Christianity today. The main weaknesses of this is that the symbols in Revelation do have literal reference. Revelation 1:20, for example, is the interpretive guide, and we're going to go ahead and read that now. The secret of the 7 stars you saw in my right hand and of the 7 gold lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So we do have symbols meaning specific things. Like that is very much a part of Revelation, and this kind of denies that. And the final view, the view that I hold, is futurism, which is that New Testament prophecies, including all of Revelation 4 through 22, refer to real people and real events that have yet to appear in the world. Now, people who've held this: Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Hippolytus, and Victorinus. The major criticisms of this view are what then is the relevance to the reader back then and even now, if these are still future events? Some argue, quote, that it removes Revelation from its original setting so that the book has little meaning for the original audience, end quote. And the response to this would be, quote, it's relevant since Christ's coming has always been expected imminently, and that even first century readers could therefore have thought of the visions about the final great tribulation were potentially quite pertinent to them. So it actually is related. The strengths of this view: it consistently follows the principles of interpreting scripture literally. It stays in line with the prophecies of Daniel that speak of the end of all things, and it fills in the end of the story that began in Genesis. So you have to first select one of those 4 views. I obviously hold to futurism. It's got a consistent hermeneutic. Then you get into the meaning of the millennium. So there are a couple of views on this as well. First, you have amillennialism. They believe that the reign of Christ is going on now, that the time frame of 1,000-year reign is the whole time between Christ's first advent and the second advent. They argue that the reign of Christ is spiritual in nature, that Christ reigns in the hearts and in heaven, in the hearts of his people. And they argue that Revelation 21 through 6 is a symbolic 1,000 years. Tychonius and Augustine in the 5th century AD both believed in this. Postmillennialism is the idea that Jesus will return post or after the millennial kingdom has been established on earth by means of preaching the gospel. And they argue that the millennium is present today. And the main distinction is they believe that the world will become Christianized by the means of mass conversions and worldwide revival. And so the world grows steadily better as the gospel message spreads, eventually culminating in a golden age, and then Christ will return. And this emerged in about the 12th century. It was popularized by Daniel Whitby in the early 18th century. Premillennialism is the idea that the return of Christ is before the millennium, that there's a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth after the second coming. This is also known as Chiliasm, and it was the dominant view of the early church. Philip Schaff, a church historian, says this, that the eschatology of the ante-Nicene age or pre-Nicene Creed, prominent Chiliasm or millenarianism, millenarianism, that the visible reign of Christ in glory on earth with the risen saints for 1,000 years before the general resurrection and judgment was the dominant view of early Christianity. Barnabas, Papias, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Methodius, and Lactantius all believed in it. There are 2 main persuasions in the modern day of this view. There's the dispensational premillennialists and the historic premillennialists. And the difference is that the former, the dispensationalists, believe in a special status of the nation of Israel in the redemptive world of God in the end times, whereas historic premillennials see the church rather than ethnic Israel as the prominent one in the millennial period. Dispensationalists also hold to a rapture prior to tribulation. Others hold it to be at the return. So those are the predominant views of the millennium. And then you resolve the rapture. So there's a pre-trib view of the rapture, which is the rapture happens before a 7-year tribulation, mid-trib view, which it happens at the midpoint, pre-wrath, it happens 3/4 of the way through, and post-trib, it happens as part of Christ's return to earth. So how do all these views kind of connect? All right, so here's the basic gist of it. The partial preterists, they're always amillennial or postmillennial, and they believe in the rapture in conjunction with the return of Christ. Historicists can be amillennial, postmillennial, or premillennial, but they believe in a post-tribulational rapture. Idealists are amillennial or postmillennial, and they hold to a post-tribulation rapture. And futurists are generally premillennial, but they can hold to any of the 4 views of the rapture in terms of what they're allowed to hold to. And so that's it. This is a very short one tonight. It was just a quick, brief understanding of the things you have to be concerned with, and I'll go ahead and summarize it again, in terms of the future and in terms of how we view the rapture in terms of the end times. First, there's adopting an approach in terms of how you're going to read the Bible, especially Revelation. Second, there's the meaning of the millennium. And third, there is resolving the rapture in terms of where it would occur. And so again, I hold to a futurist viewpoint in terms of interpretation of Revelation. and premillennial dispensationalism as well. I think that's the literal, what you get when you read the Bible literally, with symbols, but literally, as that these things refer to real events. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and cap it there. It's a short one tonight, but we're going to go ahead and cap it there. Next time, we will talk about the rapture being imminent. I'm going to go ahead and open a Zoom call here for us so we can discuss this further. So give me one moment while I do that. Okay, here's the Zoom link for those who would like to join. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and do our sign off. So thank you so much for joining us here at Spirit of Truth Church. I hope you've enjoyed this talk on the rapture and the study of the end times. Have a wonderful evening.